Welcome to Camunda's Question Corner number 18. So it's already the number 18, and today we have the first time ever we have a question corner where Nele is not joining. And that's not because we of course, would like to have Nele here, but also Camunda allows Nele from time to time to go on holidays, and that is today his holiday. So if you watch it later, Nele, I hope you had a relaxing time. But I'm not alone here today. Actually, I'm here with Tiese from the community. He sits in the boat with me today at the engine side. He knows a lot about embedding engines, and we will talk about what an embedded engine means soon. I'm also here joined by Jana, who is co-hosting with me. Jana is a technical trainer at Camunda, and she serves the technical questions today, and I think she also really likes to wakeboard, and it's the first time I'm navigating this question corner, so I'm kind of in the front of the boat, and I hope we have the next 45 minutes can answer your questions and have an informative time together. I give it a short time. Tiese, to introduce yourself. Tiese, do you like to say some words?
Yes. First of all, I'm relieved that I'm not behind the boat, to be honest, because I don't think I have the confidence doing that kind of stuff that Jana does. So I'm Tiese, yes. I work as a BPM consultant in the Netherlands, and I've worked with various clients on implementing Camunda and similar open source process engines. And that involved processes ranging from completely straight through to completely manual and everything in between. Including batches, actually, which is a nice way to use Camunda as well. And that was in all kinds of different sectors: public sector, pension sector, mobility sectors. And as Nele already said, I use Camunda mostly in the embedded form, so I have some experience using it that way.
Cool. Tiese, one question: when was the first, or do you remember your first interaction with Camunda you had? When did you join the community? I would be interested in that.
Oh, that is a good question. I think that would be shortly after the fork, actually, from Activity.
Oh, wow, that's like a long time ago.
That is a long time ago. Yeah.
Nice, cool. And well, Jana, do you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, sure. I'm Jana. I'm from the consulting team at Camunda. So I joined 1.5 years ago after I studied information technology, and I already did an apprenticeship before at a huge insurance company where we already used Camunda. So I'm familiar with it for a longer time now.
Cool. And that was your first interaction with Camunda in the insurance company, I assume, right?
Yeah, it was like, I think 2014. So yeah.
Oh, wow. So nice. We have some people that have followed the Camunda road and have some expertise here. Cool, that's good. So for everyone who is joining and might not know how it works, we use Slido for your questions. You could hand in already your questions previously to the event, but you can also start typing in questions now. So you can either scan the QR code with your phone, go to slido.com and use the hash QC18, or you can follow the link that is posted by Cass in the chat now to post your questions. And how does it work? If you do one of those three methods, you will come to the site and you will see basically those two things here. You will have the possibility to ask your question here where it says ask your question, basically. But if you maybe can't think of anything right now, you can also read the questions that other people have answered or asked before, and you can vote them up. If you think that is a really good question that makes a lot of sense, just give it a thumbs up, and then we will see that this question has a lot of interest. And of course, as this is a live event, we will try to answer the questions questions that come in more recently, because that means that those questions are by the people that are here in the call, and we want to try to answer them. So yeah, let's have the first round of questions and start with the questions from you people. So I have here the questions open, and I think I should give the honor to Tiese as our special guest today. Tiese, is there any question you would like to start this question corner?
Yes, let's take the top one here, because I think that will be useful just in defining what we mean by an embedded engine. And that also makes it possible to answer that question. So an embedded engine is an engine that you run inside another application. So you have an existing application, or you're building a new one, and because you want to add some form of process automation to that, you add the engine as a library basically to that application, and then you can use all of the functionality that's in there. So that's what it means to embed the engine inside another application. And because Camunda is written in Java, that means that practically speaking, yes, you do need to run a Java application to embed it. So I guess that is a really quick answer to that question. There is no easy way to do that with a different technology stack, I guess.
Okay, cool. I mark it as answered. Jana, is there any question that picked your attention?
Yeah, let's start with I think the second one on the list there. What is a local flag in data mapping? I think there are two questions in one, but I'll start with the first one. What is a local flag in data mapping? I think that is pretty interesting because, well, maybe I can show you.
I stopped sharing my screen.
In the modeler. I already prepared a short example. So here is a very simple test. I just have a call activity, and I added those variables, and I think the question was about this input and output mapping, because if you define an input, you can check or uncheck the local box. And to show you directly what happens if I do that, I created one input and output mapping, each one local and not local, and deployed that to an engine. Well, that's here. And if I go to that process, I can look at the variables, and well, it's in the history. I'm sorry, I'm using the Enterprise Edition, but it's nice for me to see the history here. For this instance, I can see I have the output variables, of course, because the output means those are the variables that are given back from the call, from the called process back to the called process, to the main process, I would say. And I have a normal output and the local output, and I see the scope is different. So it depends in what scope I want to have that variable. Call test is only the scope of the activity, so the local scope, while call test process, that's the scope of the whole process. So yeah, a more global scope for the normal output. And I also did that for the input. To see the input variables and the scopes, I have to open the call process. Here I am. And in the variables, I can now see I have an input and a local input. To be honest, I was a bit surprised what this should mean, because, well, both are in the same scope. The whole process is more or less the local scope, so there is no difference. And I don't really see a reason for the checkbox for the input variables here. Yeah, but that's basically the difference if you want to have the variables in the global scope or just in the local scope if you define the output. So this checkbox is relevant for the output, I would say.
Ooh, I'm thinking of maybe there's one reason when you would like to use it for input. If I understand correctly, if you check the local box for the input mapping, that would make it a local variable to the executing the call activity, which would mean it would not become a variable at the process scope. So if there's a variable that you don't want to see at the process level when you're invoking the call activity, then you could prevent it from showing up as a global variable there. So that might be a reason to do it on the input mapping.
Okay.
Just thinking out loud.
Yeah.
I haven't encountered that, to be honest, but yeah, that might be a way to do it.
I think local variables can become interesting if we not talk about call activities, but if we talk about like service tasks or other tasks where we want to have that scope where the task has a variable but not the overall process. I would say that's most of the time where I see local variables are used. Makes it definitely handy if you want to use templates, for example, and if you want to reuse certain service tasks that you have to find this local mapping. Cool. I will share my screen again. And we are back to the question. Actually, the question has a second one, so it's okay. You can post 2 questions in one Slido question, but we don't like. You can also use multiple questions. But we have now the question: what is the extension tab in the modeler? Just open the modeler here, and what we have here, so people know what I'm talking about. And actually we have here the extension where you could add your own properties, and basically that would enrich the diagram and can be used, for example, if you want to build your own plugins for the engine, for example. You might want to use extensions here for different things. That would be the use case I have here. Someone likes to add something to extensions. When do you use them? Tiese, have you used extensions?
No, but I actually needed it. We were talking about it a long time ago. Actually, this was something that I don't think was available in an activity back then. And we needed, in that project, we needed a way to mark certain user tasks as a review task. So you can implement a 4 eyes principle using 2 user tasks. But it would have been nice in that case for the reporting to be able to see which tasks were actually a review of a different task. And this would be one way that you could add that basically custom additional information to a task that you could then use either deploy time when you access the model, or you could use it at runtime to get to the model and see what the characteristics of a certain task or element in the diagram actually were. So for custom properties, basically, you could see a couple of use cases.
Yeah, that's the case. Cool. So we have this quest. We actually answered 1 Slido question with 2 questions. I mark it as done. Before we go back to Tiese, I saw something that piqued my attention, and we talked about it briefly before we started the webinar. This question here, as a quick thing, is how can I correlate a message? Is the name of the message is enough? And we already said it kind of depends. If you have 1 process instance at your standing at the message event, the message name would be enough. But if you have multiple process instances at the same message, you might get a correlation problem, because then you don't have that one-to-one correlation anymore. So then you would not just need the message name, but you need to define correlation keys. And that could be, for example, the business key, but could be also process variables, depending what you need here. Yeah, so I think, that is ticked off by that question. Tiese, I come back to you. Do you see anything that you like to answer?
Well, we have the one that's most upvoted at the moment, which is, does an embedded engine mean that developers are the ones responsible for building the BPMN model? In short, the answer to that is no. There is no reason why embedding it in the application restricts you in who could build the BPMN model. You can still use deployments at runtime through some UI, through Cockpit, through all these kinds of all these ways that are already available. What does seem typical if you have an embedded engine is that you start to see the engine as kind of an integrated component of your application. And one of the things that you can do when you deploy the engine with the application is that you can also deploy process and decision models going along with that as you start up your application. So it can be used in that way where you have your process models in version control, So they're basically just part of the software artifact that you deliver. And when you start the application, then you also deploy those models. And in that case, typically developers are the last people to touch those models to add all of the technical details, but that's definitely not a requirement. So you can use all the other ways as well.
Yeah, I think in general, that's answering the question quite well. There should be, if you use BPMN, make it available for other parties as well. I think that's one of the benefits if you have Camunda, even if you have it embedded, that you have the BPMN diagram. Cool, I mark that as answered here. Jana, did you saw something interesting?
Yeah, I thought maybe going for the latest question is a good idea in the bottom. So if I just store, it's gone. Ah, there it is. Yeah. If I just store process relevant variables in my engine DB, is there a way to enrich, optimize afterwards with business relevant information? So I guess this is a question from an enterprise customer. Yeah, Optimize is our enterprise tool where we can analyze the process instance afterwards and create reports and so on. And yeah, this is a really good question because this marks that someone is reading our best practices. Usually we recommend to only store the relevant variables in the engine database and not the copies of the business data. So usually you just store a reference to the business data in the engine database, and the business data is maybe on a very different database. And that's a good practice. So yeah, but if you want to analyze the processes afterwards, it is nice to have also the business data available, because sometimes you have to filter for that also. And yeah, so you need it for the reports. Luckily, Optimize has the possibility to that you can create a plugin for that. So Optimize usually pulls the data from the engine database, but when you pull the data, you can use a plugin to enrich the data even with the business data. So there is a plugin point for that. And yeah, that's common practice at our customers. So yeah, a good way to do it.
And I think even it's getting more interesting with Optimize, because some of the, well, not newest features, but it was added. I don't remember if it was this year or last year, that you even cannot just have events from the engine, but also from other application events, which makes it really handy to have end-to-end view of your processes. Just like to add that here, if we talk about Optimize already, I mean, it's a great tool for your analytics for sure. I mark it as done, and I see here an upvoted question, and I'm also like, I like that question a lot. Is there a plan to offer official external task clients in other languages than Node and Java? And there is a question, C# or Go. And I'm a big fan of Python. I would add Python here as well as a question mark. I think it's always interesting to know for us which other languages is used in combination with Camunda. And we see definitely from the community, we have different languages that are used, but I don't think we have anything concrete on the roadmap yet to support those languages, but we do have an active community. There is in GitHub the awesome external task client list. I will look up the link shortly for you and post it. And you can see that we have an active community building those clients, and those are also good to use. So if you want to use a client in any other language, maybe look at the list and look what's out in the community. Just because we don't have it officially yet, it doesn't mean you should not start developing Camunda and another language or in the combination. I hope that answered the question here. And I mark it as done. Tiese, I jump back to you. Anything that you see here?
Yeah, the second one is interesting. So the question is, if you use an embedded engine, do you need to add all of the other components like the REST API and the web apps? And the simple answer to that is no, you don't. Because you can run the engine inside your application. And if you don't need that other functionality that the REST API and the web apps give you, then there's no need to actually deploy those as well. In the case of the web apps, I would assume that in most cases, you'd probably want to at least use them in some shape or form, because with the engine running inside your application, you probably want to be able to look inside the black box, so to speak, to see what's going on. And if there is an incident, you probably want to be able to access that, and having a graphical tool to do that, and then with all of the capabilities that come with the web app, is probably very useful during testing and during operations. As for the REST API, I've used it in some projects and totally avoided it in others where the choice was made to develop own REST APIs, and those included the APIs that we use to interact with the process engine. So you can go both ways there. You don't need to do it, but you can. So you can basically pick and choose which ones you need.
Cool. I mark it as answered. Jana, do you see anything speaks to you?
Yeah, I think I go again for the latest question on the bottom.
This one here?
Yes. So I would like to send a notification to a user as soon as the user gets a user task. Would script be a good way to do it? In general, I would say it depends. I know that I once implemented that with an engine plugin, so that I generally send out an email to everyone who has an open user task. Well, always when the user task opens up, I send it out an email, and I did that with an engine plugin. I think you can do that with a script. For example, if you just want to do that at one place, but if you need that in multiple places, maybe, yeah, it is better to have a general solution for that and not to implement that for every user task, or, yeah.
Maybe also good to mention, I'm not sure if this talks about the script task or in general the idea of having a task listener. In general, if I see something like that, task listeners would be the way to go. Yeah. I would say, so you don't have it in your business logic in the model, but you can have it somehow still as a code running when the task, for example, is created.
Yeah, definitely.
And since it's a functionality that you probably want on every user task, or at least on a lot of them, you'd probably end up implementing that using something like a parse listener, where you add it to all of the tasks when a model is read. And using a script that you then add dynamically to the process model seems a bit like, seems rather inefficient, because you'll have to be calling an execution listener or a task listener anyway. So it seems more straightforward to implement than sending the notification there. But I guess it depends on what sending a notification means in your case, whether it's actually a useful way of doing it. But especially if you want to add it to a lot of places, then I think maybe there are better ways than using a script to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I see most of the time script, to be honest, when there is prototyping involved or some quick calculation. Would be interesting, Tiese, when do you use script, or did you ever use script with Camunda?
I have used scripts, but in most cases that was just some simple variable manipulation or something like that, and also in demo applications. I just want to be able to have a self-contained model, so something you can just deploy on a running engine if you're using a little cam boot, as Nele likes to call it, the Docker distribution. Just want to be able to hand people a process model that they can deploy, but has some functionality in there that you could at least see, or for instance, on the command line that's running it in the logging. Yeah, then you could use a script, because that's an easy way to output something without having to also have Java classes, for instance, that add that functionality.
Yeah, that's nice. Jana, do you have any other use cases for script that you've seen that you found interesting? I'm interested in hearing them as well, if there are some.
Yeah, not really. I think it's the same for me, just simple variable manipulation and demo applications.
Cool. Yeah, market is done. Okay, cool. That brings it back to me, and I might go just with the first one here. And if I stop explaining, I hand over to Tiese, who has more expertise in the embedded thing. But in a microservice landscape, should we embed multiple process engines in each service, or use a central shared engine? It's an interesting question according to architecture, and plays a little bit in this. How do you like to implement your Saga in a microservice landscape? If you want to have the central shared engine, you would have some component that orchestrates your Saga for you, and especially if the Saga aka the process is really big, I would say it makes a lot of sense to have that overview of your Saga somewhere. But it's not the only way how you could use Camunda in a microservice landscape. You could also go for multiple process engines in each microservice, which then could take care of the state of those, of the state of the service. That would be my answer to it. So it depends on how your architecture looks like and how your process looks like, what you want to achieve, but both ways are possible. Tiese, do you like to add something?
Oh yeah, sure. I think we agree on this one. You could go both ways. You can embed process engines in each of the services where you need some form of process automation. What you typically tend to strive for with microservices to have, you want some level of isolation on each of these services to be able to develop and deploy them independently. And one of the ways, I think one of the considered good practices is to divide your services by business boundaries, so logical functional chunks. What you typically find with business processes is that they span multiple of these business functions, because to get something done, you typically have these cross-functional kind of processes that run from beginning to end. And you need a way to somehow coordinate all of the work going on. But each of those services is typically responsible for part of a process, and in some cases for the end-to-end process. So by dividing your landscape into these services, you can then start deciding which service is responsible for, let's say, the acceptance of a certain process, starting to run it and ensuring that it runs all the way to the end. And then there are other participating services that run maybe just a single function in that process, or a sub-process of that process. And in that case, you can definitely choose to have a process engine in each of those services that need to do some process orchestration, and have this notion of a local orchestration where you have full control over what you're doing there, and then a global choreography where you basically make sure that everything gets done that's needed for the end-to-end process. So that's definitely one way you could go. You could also go for a central shared engine, and the advantage is that you can then have this end-to-end overview in that shared engine. But it also comes with some drawbacks where, for instance, you can't really optimize that central engine for the capabilities you need for the sub-processes. So let's assume, for instance, some part of the process is really computation intensive, and you would, for instance, like to optimize your job executor, which is the technical component in Camunda that would handle let's say, the asynchronous work going on. But there are a lot of parameters you can configure to that job executor to be optimized for the kind of tasks it typically has to do. If you have a central engine, you can't really optimize for one sub-process because it might negatively affect the other ones. So that's a drawback of having it in a central place, even though you can then manage things centrally. And also with central things always comes the question, who is responsible for maintaining that? Who dares to really upgrade it when there's a new release? Because who will then test that everything still works on this shared platform? So I think if you're starting to cut up your landscape into smaller services, I think it makes sense to at least consider having separate process engines for separate services, and maybe have some that coordinate the work between them. That's a really long answer to that question, which basically means it depends, but there are some obviously advantages and disadvantages depending on your situation.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we could keep talking about it when it could be useful even to have that centralized component, but also when it's not, as you just argued. But I will mark it now for answered for now, but maybe there will be some discussions going on around that. I always remember that there is I will link that in the video description. I really like the sheet of Bernd that he wrote about how to use a process engine in a microservice architecture. That might be interesting here as well. And mark it as answered. Jana, something that you like to answer?
Yeah, I go for the top question there. This is, I guess, an easy one. It asks, how can I check in a gateway if a variable exists? And then there is a wrong expression or a failing expression. This is a very typical question I received during trainings because yeah, if you have an XOR gateway and you want to check for a variable that is maybe not there, and you just check if the variable is null, then you run into an exception, or yeah, because it can't resolve the identifier. But the trick is quite simple. You can just check, well, you can, in those expressions, you have access to the execution object. So if you just call execution.get variable and then ask for the variable, you receive the value of the variable, or if it's not there, you will receive null. So you can just check over the execution object if the variable is there.
Okay, cool.
I think there's even a different way you could do that. I haven't tested that, to be honest, recently, but you could also use, in the expression language, there's something like an empty operator or keyword. I think you could also use that one to check if something is empty or not. That will not then fail at least.
I think I tried it out and it failed.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
Still cannot resolve the identifier. So yeah, I think.
I also think it has to exist because it will fail if it's not existing. But
okay, then maybe it works slightly differently from the documentation I was just looking at. But that's always possible.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but I mark that as answered. Tiese, anything that you see here? There are 3 questions left.
Okay, let's have a look.
I think 2 are about the embedded engine.
Yeah, let's see. So I'll just take the bottom one, actually. Is there a circumstance where it's recommended to use an in-memory database? Yes. Testing, for instance, is a very easy one. If you're testing, it helps to have an in-memory database because you don't want to have the dependency on a real database. And obviously for some applications, you might want to use the in-memory database instead of connecting to a real one. But testing, I think, would be the main one for that.
I would agree. I would not use it in production, I would say. It's too dangerous.
Unless you really don't need to keep any state that's really persistent. But why are you using a process engine in that case? You never know.
You never know. Yeah, maybe as a best practice, if you go to production, you should make sure that the H2 database is not in there anymore, that you have another connection.
Yeah. But for the embedded engine question, if I may just take another one.
Yeah, sure. That's the one here, right?
Yeah.
I want to use the Camunda engine in an embedded architecture. Can I connect it to the database from my application, or should I use a separate database?
I would lean towards using the database from the application. And the main reason for that is, I think one of the main advantages of having an embedded engine, which sounds like a rather trivial thing. Okay, it's just a library and you can include it. Well, so that's easy. But it has quite some impact in the sense that what you gain from doing that is that you can have transactional integration with your application data, which means that if you're executing a process and you're updating something within your application, for instance, in a service task, that is either persisted as a unit, so executing the step and completing it in the process and saving the data in your application, or it is rolled back if something goes wrong. And that is a huge advantage to have, because then you know that your process and the application that it's working with or on are always in sync. But that only works if you have the, let's say, the database as the common ground, and that works if you use the application database to store the Camunda state as well. Let's say, at least in the easy setup, if you don't want to do anything really complicated with transaction managers and things like that, this is the kind of functionality that you get out of the box if you use the same database. So in general, I would first go with that option, unless you have a really good reason to have a separate database from the same application.
Okay, cool. I mark it as answered. I saw a question, and there are just 2 questions left, and I think we can handle them. I take the one that is here. What is the percentage of enterprise using Camunda Platform versus Camunda Cloud? And I have to disappoint you because I don't know the number here, and I don't want to make some numbers up. Just Camunda, I would assume there are still more on Camunda Platform, but because Camunda Cloud is the new technology that we have, it's possible to have it on premise and run as a service. But as I said, Camunda Platform is there for longer, so I would assume there are more people using Camunda Platform. But as I don't have the numbers, I don't want to make them up. I'm sorry that I can't answer that. I don't know if some of you can. I don't know if you have numbers somewhere around. Probably not. No.
I don't have concrete numbers, but I'm also pretty sure Camunda Platform is more used.
Yeah, but that might change in the future because Camunda Cloud is just released. So just mark that here as done, and sorry that we can't provide here the answer.
What is interesting maybe to add to that is that actually in Bernd's recent book, he advocates for having your process engine basically as a piece of infrastructure, and he points out that having it available in the cloud may be the way to go for the future. But it's interesting in relation to a question that we took before, where the question was, should I have multiple process engines, or do we have one centrally shared one? And obviously, if you have it running in the cloud, you can still have multiple clusters if you really want to separate them. But it's one of those things where I'm really interested in seeing how that will turn out, how people will start using that in projects if they really use just one central engine, one cluster that runs all of the processes, because then you're starting to centralize things again instead of just having it as a facility that you can use anywhere. Or that if they will actually start using separate process engines, so you, for instance, can upgrade or do different things in a certain cluster in another way than you would do if you shared it. So that will be interesting for the future, I guess.
Yeah, I'm also super excited to see the future project that's coming up with it. Actually, as you said, also super excited to see the future projects with cloud that are going to be there. I think that brings us for today to the end. I have to watch the time a little bit. So I just have some remarking words here. We almost answered all the questions. Sorry for the ones that we have not got to. You can always post your questions in the Camunda forum as well. We will answer them. Like a bunch of people from Camunda is in the forum, but also the community is very active in the forum. So please feel free to share the questions there as well, and we make sure we answer them. If you want to know what other things are going on in the community, you can go to the camunda.com events page, and you will see all the upcoming events here. If you want to join the next question corner, you will find it here as well. If you want to have more Camunda, we have the second Camunda Community Summit coming up in 2022. You already need to save the date. It's the 26th to 28th of April. You can already register for it so you don't forget it. And more importantly, we also need you for the Camunda Community Summit. If you have any interesting story you like to share from the community, please feel free to submit a proposal. And if you are not sure if it's something you could present, you can always reach out to the developer relation team at community@camunda.com, and we are happy to assist you with your proposal and see how it fits to the community summit. I'm already looking forward to meeting the community at the summit and have exchange around Camunda there. And last but not least, we also have a newsletter, and if you want to be up to date, not just with events, but also with technical information, technical content, please subscribe to the Camunda Developer newsletter that is sent out every month. And yeah, I want to thank you for this question corner, Tiese for joining us, and also Jana for jumping in. And it was really nice talking to you about Camunda and all the questions we received. This is already the last question corner of the year. It's incredible to say that now, but I guess it's time to say Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year already, but we start this now. So we see you with a question corner next year, and thanks for joining.